There was a red bridal veil covering her eyes. She could see the stitches behind the embroidery, a pair of mandarin ducks, representing love and devotion. The tiny pearls attached to the veil's tassels swayed with her every move, tracing beautiful arcs. A delicate watery fragrance was drifting in the air, creating a calming atmosphere within the room. Chu Lian lifted the veil slightly and cast a measuring gaze over the arrangements of the bridal chamber. There was a pair of red wedding candles, as thick as a child's arm, burning on the table, and a basket of red eggs in front of them. A decorative screen made of agar wood with a carving of the four seasons stood next to the table. There were even square pieces of Lanshan jade, each about the same size, inlaid on the screen. This scene was exactly the same as the one described in the novel. A wave of joy burst forth in Chu Lian's heart. She had really transmigrated into the novel she had been reading, and she had even taken the place of the female lead. What she was experiencing now was the beginning of the novel. Chu Lian was filled with expectation. Now that she was the female lead, she could marry the perfect man described in the novel. She was not going to violate her marriage vows like the novel's female lead, Chu Lian, had. She was going to be a virtuous wife, pass carefree days with her husband, and properly manage her own household in order to make up for the previous regrets that she had had in the modern world. It was a pity that she had only read halfway through the book before she had been transmigrated. While she was lost in her thoughts, the sound of footsteps and voices came from outside the room. Chu Lian hurriedly lowered her veil and corrected her posture. A flustered maidservant, Fuyan, came in to remind her. "Sixth miss, the bridal attendants and young master are here." Another maidservant, Xian, quickly adjusted Chu Lian's bridal dress before standing respectfully with Fuyan to one side. Chu Lian made a sound of acknowledgement. Her heart was thumping in her chest and she was unbelievably nervous inside. She felt like her heart was about to leap out of her throat. The bridal attendants' congratulations rang out, followed by the candid and teasing voices of some men. In an instant, the peace in the room was broken by the noise outside, and the atmosphere turned boisterous and joyful. "Sanlang, quick, take off the veil and let us see what kind of beauty our sister-in-law is." "That's right, he Sanlang. We can't wait any longer." One of the bridal attendants echoed the teasing and happily picked up a golden rod from a nearby maidservant's serving tray, passing it over to the third son of the He family. "Third young master, please pull aside the veil. May all your wishes come true." Their gazes shifted to the bride sitting in proper posture on the bed. Everyone wanted to see what the He family's newest daughter-in-law looked like. Thus, no one noticed the trace of mocking contempt that flashed through the groom's eyes. From behind the cover of the bridal veil, Chu Lian could only see a pair of black and red wedding boots in front of her. They were embroidered with a complicated pattern of flowing clouds and looked quite pretty. The golden rod appeared under her veil. In the next second, the red that had filled her vision transformed into a bright world. The sudden light was overwhelming. Chu Lian couldn't help but squint. The bride's beautiful features were revealed. When the veil was lifted, curved brows, red lips, almond-shaped eyes and rosy cheeks. Like a newly blossomed lotus, she looked bashful and lovely. Chu Lian only raised her head and glanced once at her future husband, He Changdi, before lowering her head again, not daring to look any longer. However, it was this unbearable bashfulness that added a touch of color to the beautiful bride before them. Instantly, one of He Changdi's good friends started to tease him. "Sanlang, you lucky little brat." Even second young master patted his little brother's broad and sturdy shoulders in satisfaction, giving his approval of his new sister-in-law. He Changdi was quickly dragged out by his good friends for drinks. The bridal attendants left some instructions before leaving as well, allowing the bridal chamber to settle back into tranquility. Chu Lian's heart was still beating crazily. Thinking back to that one quick glance, she was still in disbelief that such a handsome and perfect man would soon become her husband. So immersed in her joy, Chu Lian had completely overlooked the strange look in her new husband's eyes when she had met his gaze just now. Meanwhile, senior servant Guy frowned as she tidied up some things at the side. She was already over 30 years old and had already seen countless people. Just now, when everyone had been focused on the bride's face. She had been looking at the new young master's expression. You could tell whether a man was satisfied with his bride from the look on his face. Senior servant Guy had absolute confidence in Chu Lian's appearance. However, after seeing such a beautiful young girl, the new young master hadn't shown any signs of being taken aback. Instead, his eyes were like a deep lake or an old well, calm and still, without any signs of a ripple. The thought gnawed at senior servant Guy, until she could not help but turn to look at sixth miss, who was still sitting by the bed with her lips curled up. A knot of anxiety sat heavy in her chest, and she could only hope that her old eyes had seen wrongly, unless their hearts were made of steel. What kind of man wouldn't treasure such a beautiful flower? Chu Lian was about to take off her phoenix crown when she was held back by Xian. Sixth miss, the bridal attendant left instructions for you just now. You have to wait for third young master to personally take off the phoenix crown. Chu Lian helplessly put down her hands and stretched her aching neck instead. She could only leave it like this. Xian felt that sixth miss actions were a little funny. Don't worry, sixth miss, they won't delay. Young master for too long with matriarch in attendance. Young master will be back soon. Xian's teasing made Chu Lian blush. Why do you have so much to say today when you're usually so silent? Chu Lian glared at her in rebuke and calmed down. She stood up and ordered the maidservants to put away the things she had brought with her. Before an hour had passed, a maidservant announced from outside that young master had returned. Some dried foods, including peanuts and dried longans, were scattered over the red covers of the conjugal bed. Right after Chu Lian got senior servant Guy to clear those away, He Changdi stepped into the outer chamber. No one was following by He Changdi's side this time. Only a bridal attendant who had come to pass down some customs. After He Changdi stepped into the inner chamber, the bridal attendant smiled as she indicated for a maidservant to bring in the nuptial wine that had been prepared earlier. Third young master, third young madam, after drinking this nuptial wine, you'll become a couple who will go through thick and thin together. The bridal attendant was full of smiles as she handed the nuptial wine over. He Changdi stood tall and straight like an infallible, sturdy pine. Had there been an audience, his poise would have garnered the admiration of many. He took his cup but continued to stand in front of the bed without moving. The bridal attendant suddenly felt as if the atmosphere in the bridal chamber had turned cold. She secretly wiped away the cold sweat from her forehead, before smiling brightly and handing the other cup of nuptial wine to Chu Lian. After third young master and third young madam have drunk the nuptial wine, third young master has to personally remove the phoenix crown on third young madam's head, so that your days will be full of peace and harmony. Right after the bridal attendant finished blessing them with auspicious words, He Changdi spoke, his tone frigid. All right, you can leave now. Huh? The bridal attendant was still a little stunned when she subconsciously replied, Third young master, you haven't drunk the... Did you not hear what I said? He Changdi's voice abruptly turned grave, chilling the previously warm air of the chamber. The bridal attendant was simply a servant, so she didn't dare to argue with the He family's third young master. With extreme reverence and fear, she answered in agreement and left a few more auspicious words. Before leaving with the maidservant in a hurry, she racked her brains but couldn't tell what fit this young master was pulling, so she could only lament that she was probably the first bridal attendant to have been chased out of a bridal chamber. Chu Lian had been waiting to drink the nuptial wine with her head lowered. She blanked out for a moment, not understanding what He Changdi was doing. Why was this sequence of events a little different from the novel? While she was still confused, He Changdi ordered senior servant Guy, Xian, and the rest of the servants out. Chu Lian raised her head to look at the third son of the He family. His brows were nicely shaped and his features were well defined. Upon seeing his actual person, his face seemed to have been made of fine jade. Chu Lian thought that he was even more handsome than how the novel had described him. But what was with that unrestrained frosty look in his eyes? Why was he looking at her with such a cold and mocking gaze? For a moment, Chu Lian was stumped for words, because she was stunned by his cold and arrogant countenance. Based on the progression of events in the novel, He Changdi had not consummated their marriage. because the female lead had refused to, but He Changdi had still treated the female lead with tenderness and consideration. In the bridal chamber, the way things had just unfolded gave her a sinking feeling. Seemingly having noticed the confusion in Chu Lian's shiny, black eyes, He Changdi stepped forward and bent down slightly. His eyes were like a frozen lake, without a shred of warmth or joy, and the ice seemed to extend for immeasurable depths below the surface. He watched the pretty girl before him closely, as if he were looking for something within her gaze. After seeing the girl panic, the corners of He Changdi's lips suddenly lifted, revealing a smile that could send chills down anyone's back. He was clearly a handsome and extraordinary man with an awe-inspiring righteous aura. However, when he smiled like that, it added on a hint of devilish charm. Chu Lian was so entranced by He Changdi's looks, she couldn't react fast enough. So, when He Changdi raised his hand and slowly poured the nuptial wine all onto the floor, Chu Lian could only watch his actions in disbelief as that small cup of nuptial wine left a dark, wet stain on the bright red Persian carpet. She subconsciously mumbled, "What are you doing?" Without waiting for Chu Lian to react, the cup of nuptial wine in her hands was also sent flying. The wine scattered all over her red wedding dress. In the next second, her wrists had been captured in a bruising grip and a voice, so cold it could freeze bone, rang in her ears. "Can't you tell what I'm doing, my dear bride?" What the heck? What was going on? Why weren't they going by the book anymore? Chu Lian was inwardly wailing amidst her shock and anger. However, before she could speak, He Changdi roughly pulled off her phoenix crown and threw it to the ground. Some of the strands of her black hair were yanked out along with the headdress, leaving an aching pain in their wake. He Changdi kept his voice low as he roared in anger, "You're not fit to wear this phoenix crown." Chu Lian tried to push away the man before her, but unfortunately, she wasn't strong enough. Her hands were just like kitten paws in the face of a male's strength, lacking any bit of might. When He Changdi saw that she was trying to fight back, his eyes bled with anger and he wrapped his hands around Chu Lian's tiny, snow-white neck. Even the veins on his slender hands were popping out. His hate for her was clearly reflected in his eyes. Chu Lian could feel every bit of that murderous intent. However, Chu Lian had never experienced anything like this before. She only felt the unyielding grip on her neck, squeezing like a noose, forcing her to cry from the pain. She couldn't breathe. It felt like she was going to die in the next moment. Her fair face had already turned blue from suffocation. He Changdi thought he only had to exert a little more strength before he could finally be free from this wicked woman forever. However, the thought of his grandmother and his brothers, who he knew wished only the best for him, popped into his mind. He Changdi didn't think he could bear watching as their hopes were dashed. The reputations of both the houses of Duke Ying and Count Jing, and were also at stake if he were to kill this woman. Thus, he could only dejectedly let go of her neck and glare instead, his hatred thick and cloying like miasma. He would leave this bitch alive for now. After the grip around her neck loosened, Chu Lian touched the bruises left on her neck, her face pale as a sheet. Air was finally free to flow into her throat, causing her to cough uncontrollably. If she had really been killed by her new husband just now, she would have become the most tragic transmigrator ever. Chu Lian's throat was unbearably dry and she couldn't even speak. All she could do was hold her chest and pant for breath. He Changdi's expression turned even more overcast and ugly. He sneered and said, "Sixth miss of the Chu family. Don't assume that everyone else is stupid." Chu Lian frowned and stared at He Changdi's tall figure. Her brows were furrowed as her gaze took on a tinge of a probing glint. When she looked at him, she was very confused. The He Changdi in the novel was supposed to be easygoing and open-hearted. He was a rare stalwart gentleman. However, the person before her had nothing in common with the male lead who had been described in the novel. Apart from his looks, his personality was completely different. If the He Changdi in the novel was like a noble and sullied bright moon, then the He Changdi before her was like a cold wind cutting through the night, bringing chills wherever he went. How had this happened? Chu Lian thought long and hard, but she still couldn't understand. Everything had gone exactly like the novel had described, except when it came to He Changdi. As for the newlywed groom standing with his hands behind his back, he tossed his sleeves and heartlessly walked right out of the bridal chamber. It was as if gazing upon his pretty bride for a moment longer would make him blind. So the only answer left was to leave. After He Changdi had left, senior servant Gi and Chu Lian's personal maidservants rushed in. When they saw Chu Lian sprawled on the ground, eyes blank and hair a mess, the phoenix crown unceremoniously lying on the floor, senior servant Gi's eyes reddened as her mind filled in the details of the events that had just occurred in the bridal chamber. Sixth Miss, please stand up. The floor is cold. You have to take care of your body. Senior servant Gi discreetly wiped the corners of her eyes and pulled Chu Lian up with the help of Jingyan, letting her rest on the bed. After sending Xian to the bathroom for hot water, senior servant Gi gently asked, Sixth Miss, what happened with young master just now? Did Sixth Miss suffer any grievances? Chu Lian finally regained her senses. She still couldn't wrap her head around how He Changdi's personality had changed so much. Raising her head, she took a look at the nursemaid and maidservants who had accompanied Chu Lian. When she had left her maiden home, Chu Lian bore with the pain in her neck and the doubts in her heart to smile at them, trying not to look so pitiful. She knew that these servants cared for Chu Lian wholeheartedly. It's nothing, you don't have to worry about it, Momo. Let Xian and the others prepare some hot water. I want to bathe and get out of this cumbersome bridal dress. It seemed like she wanted to hide what just happened by changing the topic, so senior servant Gi felt that she shouldn't continue pursuing her line of questioning. However, she couldn't stop worrying and urged, Sixth Miss, don't forget, you have this servant and these few girls by your side. Chu Lian nodded absent-mindedly, making senior servant Gi anxious. While Fuyan was helping Chu Lian wash in the bath, she discovered the bruises ringing her fair neck. Fuyan jumped in shock, but with a quick turn of wit, she didn't ask Chu Lian how she had gotten those bruises. Instead, she went to report this matter to senior servant Gi without Chu Lian's knowledge. After having a hot bath and changing into a thin, red nightgown, the lighter weight on her body finally helped dispel the rest of the fright He Changdi had given her. When she came out of the bathroom, Minjian had already tiddied up the conjugal bed. Fuyan supported her as she walked to the dressing table and helped her remove her makeup. By the time Chu Lian finished drinking a small cup of fragrant tea, it was already 9 p.m. The groom should have returned to the bridal chamber by now. Although Chu Lian didn't understand why He Changdi's personality had changed so much, she still waited patiently. Finally, a maidservant dressed in green came. The maidservant passed on a message. Third young madam, third young master drank too much at the banquet just now because he was receiving toasts from a few princes and close friends. He was afraid of disturbing young madam with the smell of alcohol, so he's already settled in the study. He says to let young madam rest earlier. When senior servant Gi and the other maidservants heard the green-clad maidservant's words, all of their expressions turned blank in shock. He Sanlang wasn't going to enter the bridal chamber. If this were to spread out of the estate, how would their young miss be able to raise her head outside? Sixth Miss, how could this be? Why don't you let this old servant send someone to invite third young master over? Senior servant Gi couldn't understand why He Changdi had refused to even enter the bridal chamber. There were no grudges between the two families, and Sixth Miss hadn't offended anyone in the house of Count Jinggan either, let alone He Sanlang. The two of them had not even met before the wedding, so how could there be any resentment between them? However, Chu Lian shook her head and sent the green-clad maidservant away. There's no need for that. Momo, why don't you all go to bed? There's no need for us to invite him. He Sanlang will return to the bridal chamber by himself. As for why Chu Lian would say something like that, it was purely because of what she had just experienced. He Changdi had nearly strangled her to death, but he had left her hanging by a thread in the end, frightened but alive. Combined with the mysterious things that she couldn't make head nor tails of, it was highly unlikely that He Changdi was avoiding the bridal chamber because he was drunk. Besides, when he had come in just now, she hadn't smelled a trace of alcohol on him. He was clearly doing this on purpose to humiliate her. Since he was doing this on purpose, why would she try to invite him back? Wasn't that just asking to be humiliated? Furthermore, when had a bride ever needed to beg for her husband to enter the bridal chamber? Sixth miss. Fuyan stubbornly refused to go to sleep. How could third young master act like this? Sixth miss was his formal and legal wife. All right, go wash up and go to bed. We still have to get up early tomorrow. Nothing will change even if you fuss around here. Senior servant Gi could only bring the other maidservants out with her as she left, leaving Chu Lian alone in the bridal chamber. Chu Lian sat on the side of the bed and ran through everything that had happened in her mind, trying to recall some details that she had read in the novel. Then she removed the white handkerchief hidden under the bedsheets. Using a silver needle that she had found, Chu Lian pricked her ring finger, letting the blood well up and drip onto the white handkerchief. Finally, she stored the handkerchief away. She had been orphaned at an early age in the modern world and had grown up poor. After a period of hardship and hard work, dueling back and forth with the schemes of others on her career path while learning how to be two-faced, she had finally made a better life for herself. Thus, Chu Lian wasn't naive at all. In fact, she was rather smart and tenacious. She knew how to wait and observe the situation. Although she had been hoping for a perfect and genuine romance, it didn't mean that she was an absolute fool. Everything that had happened just now was already enough food for thought. She was even starting to suspect that the current He Changdi could be in a similar situation as hers, and was no longer the original He Changdi. Chu Lian believed in herself. She wasn't a softie that someone could just trample over. The most important thing right now was to make sense of the situation. That said, Chu Lian felt rather lucky that she had some foreknowledge of what was going to happen. Although she wasn't too clear on the current situation anymore, she wasn't going to just sit there and be humiliated. If He Changdi was still the original He Changdi, then she wouldn't mind playing nice with him and treating him as her actual husband. However, if He Changdi had changed and become a bastard, then she wouldn't let him play around with her as he liked. After consolidating her thoughts, Chu Lian burrowed into the auspicious red blankets and slipped into dreamland within a few short moments. What's the situation over there? A tall, lanky figure hidden under the dim candlelight questioned an inconspicuous maidservant. Replying to third young master, third young madam has already gone to bed. What? The hand He Changdi had been holding behind his back abruptly tightened into a fist, his knuckles turning white. Chu Lian's reaction was completely out of He Changdi's predictions. He had avoided going to the bridal chamber in order to humiliate her, but he hadn't thought that that bitch could still sleep this easily. Recalling all the events that had happened in his past life, He Changdi felt only hatred welling up inside him. He couldn't change his marriage, but he wouldn't let this woman occupying the position of his legal wife pass her days peacefully. Otherwise, how could he bear the pain she had inflicted on him in her previous life? While most people treasured every moment of their wedding night, He Changdi hated that this night couldn't pass quicker. He wanted to see his good wife's ugly expression when she wouldn't be able to hand over the white handkerchief that acted as a virginity test the next day. As expected, before the sun rose, after waking from her deep sleep, Chu Lian heard the soft rustling of clothes being taken off. The wedding candles were still lit up, so she could clearly see the person standing by the bed. Just by opening her eyes a little, He Changdi was tall and slender, but he didn't seem too skinny or weak. With long brows and handsome features, he exuded a heroic aura. Looking at him under the dim light, the cold and gloomy expression he had during the day was gone. Without it, he appeared as handsome as a god. He really lived up to his title of He Sanlang the Fair. At this moment, He Sanlang finally fit with his description in the novel. However, upon thinking of He Changdi's changes, Chu Lian rolled her eyes and shut them. Going back to sleep once again, He Changdi had stayed in the study for more than half the night with an uneasy state of mind. It was the start of winter, so no matter how strong and healthy he was, he still felt cold all over in the end. He casually took off his outer robe and threw it to one side before pushing aside the curtains on the bedchamber. The scene that unfolded before his eyes caused his dormant temper to ignite again, as if it had been doused with gasoline. Chu Lian was curled up in the warm blankets, sleeping soundly. Her hair was slightly messy, and her lips were tilted upwards. She was clearly very comfortable, and she didn't look the slightest bit troubled. Meanwhile, He had been suffering in the cold study, stifled by his emotions, without even the appetite to finish his dinner. Suddenly, Changdi felt that his ploy to give Chu Lian the cold shoulder had been completely ineffective. As if he had been punching cotton, he took in a deep breath and coldly watched the girl wrapped in the warm blankets. Then he pulled away the blankets wrapped around Chu Lian with a strong tug. Chu Lian was already used to sleeping alone, and she liked to wrap herself up in her blankets when she slept to preserve warmth. When Changdi tugged the blankets like that, it wasn't only the blankets that were pulled away. Chu Lian rolled along with the tug, and ended up sprawled over the outer half of the bed. Changdi let out a depressed sigh and could only bring out another set of blankets and move them over to the now empty inner part of the bedchamber. He crawled in silently to sleep. However, the cold blankets on his body made him feel even worse. There wasn't a single spot on his body that was warm anymore. Chu Lian shifted a little and wrapped the warm blankets around herself more tightly. In her heart, she thought to herself in bad taste that Sanlang could simply freeze to death. Changdi took in a deep breath to calm himself down and shut his eyes. However, before the icy cold blankets on Sanlang could warm up, some older servants from the main house came to invite the newlyweds to wake up. Senior servant Gi was standing in the outer chamber, exchanging greetings from the two servants from the main house with her heart in her throat. If Countess Jingin or matriarch, he found out that third young master had not stayed in the young mistress' room last night, then how would the young mistress be able to comfortably live in the estate of Count Jingin from now on? Although senior servant Gi was still carefully receiving the older servants together with Xian, she was close to collapsing inside. Finally, she heard Chu Lian calling for Jingyan to enter in a soft voice.